For 18 years, my parents called me the family failure. Then Dad's lawyer read one sentence from his final letter, and suddenly my sister's smile disappeared. My mother's face turned white, and the room became so quiet you could hear people breathing, because the letter revealed something Dad had been watching for years, something nobody thought he knew. And when the truth finally came out, everything my family believed about me fell apart. My father died believing the truth would eventually come out. At least that's what his final letter said. The letter that turned my family's world upside down. The letter that made my sister stop smiling. The letter that finally answered a question I had carried for 18 years. Why was I never enough? For most of my life, I thought the answer was simple. I thought something was wrong with me, something missing, something broken. But I eventually learned the problem wasn't me. The problem was the role my family assigned me before I was old enough to understand it, the role of the family failure. And once someone gets assigned that role, every mistake becomes proof, every success gets ignored, and every achievement somehow belongs to someone else. In my case, that someone else was my younger sister, Olivia. Olivia was born when I was 6 years old. The day she arrived, everything changed. Not immediately, not in obvious ways, but slowly, quietly. The kind of changes children notice before adults admit they exist. Mom became obsessed with her. Dad couldn't stop talking about her. Relatives constantly visited. Everyone wanted pictures. Everyone wanted updates. Everyone wanted to hold the new baby. And somewhere during all that excitement, I became less important. At least that's how it felt. At first, I understood. She was a baby. Babies need attention. But the attention never balanced out again, not even years later. When Olivia started school, she became the center of every family conversation. Every report card was displayed on the refrigerator. Every drawing was framed. Every award received its own celebration. When I brought home good grades, the response was usually, "That's nice." When Olivia did the same thing, "We're so proud of you." The difference was impossible to miss. One Christmas, when I was 12, my grandmother gave each grandchild $50. Nothing huge, just a thoughtful gift. I spent weeks deciding how to use mine. Eventually, I bought books and saved the rest. Olivia spent hers in a single afternoon. 2 weeks later, she wanted a new bicycle. Mom bought it immediately. When I asked for help purchasing a laptop for school a few months later, Dad shook his head. "You need to learn responsibility." I remember standing there stunned. Responsibility? I had saved my money. Olivia spent hers. Yet somehow I was the one receiving the lecture. Mom noticed my expression. Then came the sentence I'd hear hundreds of times over the years. "Stop comparing yourself to your sister." The irony was unbelievable, because comparing us was exactly what they did every day. By high school, the favoritism wasn't even subtle anymore. Everyone knew. Teachers knew. Relatives knew. Neighbors knew. Nobody talked about it openly, but everyone saw it. At family dinners, conversations revolved around Olivia's future, her grades, her sports, her goals. Meanwhile, I sat quietly at the same table, feeling invisible. Sometimes I'd tell a story about school. Halfway through, someone would interrupt. Then the discussion would return to Olivia, almost automatically, like a reflex, like a habit nobody realized they had. One afternoon during sophomore year, I came home carrying an academic award. I'd worked incredibly hard for it. Months of studying, late nights, extra projects. The moment felt important, at least to me. I walked into the kitchen smiling. Mom glanced at the certificate, then nodded. "That's good?" "Good. Just good. Nothing more." 5 minutes later, Olivia mentioned making the volleyball team. Mom called relatives. Dad ordered pizza. The entire evening became a celebration. I sat at the table staring at my award, realizing nobody had asked a single question about it. That night, I cried quietly in my room. Not because Olivia succeeded, because nobody noticed when I did. As the years passed, something inside me changed. I stopped expecting praise, stopped expecting recognition, stopped expecting fairness. It hurt less that way. Or at least I told myself it did. Dad wasn't cruel. That's important to understand. Neither was Mom. Not intentionally. They weren't monsters, they weren't abusive. They genuinely loved both daughters. I believe that. Even now. The problem was that love wasn't distributed equally, and unequal love creates invisible wounds, the kind people can't see, the kind that last for years. By the time I graduated high school, Olivia had become the family star, the future lawyer, the future success story, the future everything. And me? I was simply Emma, the daughter everyone worried about, the daughter everyone doubted, the daughter who somehow became the example of what not to be. Then came college, the moment I thought everything might finally change. I was wrong, very wrong, because college was where my parents' favoritism became impossible to ignore, and it was also where my father began noticing things he would later write about in his final letter, things nobody realized he was watching, including Olivia, including Mom, and especially me. College was supposed to be a fresh start, a chance to leave old labels behind, a chance to become someone new. For the first few weeks, I actually believed it would be. Nobody at college knew I was the family failure. Nobody compared me to Olivia. Nobody cared who my sister was. For the first time in my life, I felt free. And honestly, it was one of the happiest periods I'd ever experienced. I chose a state university 3 hours from home, not because it was my dream school, because it was the school I could afford. I received a partial scholarship and worked part-time to cover the rest. Every semester became a balancing act. Classes, work, bills, assignments, repeat. Sometimes I worked until midnight and attended lectures at 8 the next morning. It wasn't easy, but it was mine. Everything I earned belonged to me. Every success felt real. Meanwhile, Olivia attended a private university, one of the best in the state. Mom and Dad paid nearly everything: tuition, housing, travel expenses, books, even spending money. Whenever she needed something, they found a way. When I struggled, the answer was always the same. You need to learn independence. The irony never stopped hurting. One afternoon during my second year, my car broke down. The repair cost was nearly a month's paycheck. I called Dad, not because I wanted money, because I needed advice. Instead, the conversation became another lecture. Life isn't easy, Emma. I know. You have to solve problems yourself. I understand. You'll appreciate success more when you've earned it. By the time the call ended, I felt worse than before. Not because he refused to help, because I knew if Olivia had called, the outcome would have been different. A week later, I discovered I was right. I visited home unexpectedly one weekend. As I walked into the driveway, I noticed a brand new car, a beautiful silver SUV. I assumed it belonged to a neighbor. Then Olivia stepped out of the driver's seat, smiling, excited, proud. Mom spotted me standing there. Do you like it? I looked at the vehicle. It's nice. Your father bought it for Olivia. Of course he did. Nobody noticed my expression. Nobody noticed the silence. Nobody noticed the fact that I'd spent the previous week figuring out how to pay for repairs while Olivia received a brand new vehicle. The difference had become normal, expected, accepted. That night, I lay awake in my childhood bedroom staring at the ceiling, not angry, just tired. Tired of pretending the favoritism wasn't real, tired of pretending it didn't hurt. Tired of being told everything was equal when it clearly wasn't. The next morning, something unexpected happened. Dad knocked on my bedroom door, just after breakfast. Can we talk? That alone surprised me. Dad rarely initiated conversations like that, especially private ones. We sat on the back porch together, the same porch where he'd spent countless evenings drinking coffee and reading newspapers. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Then Dad broke the silence. You're doing well. I looked at him. What? College. He nodded. Work. Another nod. Life. I didn't know how to respond. Because praise from Dad had become so rare, it felt unfamiliar. Thanks. He smiled slightly, then looked toward the yard. You remind me of your grandfather. That caught my attention immediately. Dad admired Grandpa more than anyone. How? Dad laughed quietly. He never waited for someone else to solve his problems. I wasn't sure whether that was a compliment or another lesson. Then he added, and he never quit. Something about his tone felt different, more thoughtful, more reflective, like he wanted to say something else but wasn't sure how. Before I could ask, Mom called from inside. The moment ended, and Dad returned to the house. At the time, I thought very little about that conversation. Years later, I would remember every word, because that was the first time I realized something important. Dad saw more than he admitted, much more. Over the next few years, life moved quickly. I graduated, found a stable job, rented my first apartment, started building a career. Nothing glamorous, nothing extraordinary, just steady progress. Meanwhile, Olivia became the family's success story. Exactly as everyone predicted, she attended law school, received awards, joined a prestigious firm. Every achievement became another family celebration. At holidays, relatives asked about Olivia constantly, her promotion, her salary, her future. Sometimes they forgot to ask about me at all, and when they did, the conversations rarely lasted long. Then one Thanksgiving changed everything. I arrived carrying exciting news I'd spent months waiting to share. I had been promoted, a major promotion, the biggest opportunity of my career. For the first time, I truly felt proud of myself. Dinner seemed like the perfect moment to announce it. Everyone was present: Mom, Dad, Olivia, aunts, uncles, cousins, the entire family. Halfway through the meal, I finally spoke. I got promoted. Several relatives smiled. A few congratulated me. Then Olivia casually mentioned a new legal case she was handling. Within seconds, the conversation shifted. Completely. Again. By the end of dinner, nobody remembered my announcement. Not one person. Later that evening, I stepped outside for air. The cold November wind felt refreshing, quiet, honest, unlike the dinner table. A few minutes later, Dad joined me. Neither of us spoke at first. We simply stood there, watching leaves move across the yard. Then Dad surprised me. "You deserved more attention tonight." I turned toward him, certain I'd misheard. "What?" He sighed, then repeated himself. "You deserved more attention." The words hit harder than I expected, because they acknowledged something nobody else ever acknowledged: the imbalance, the difference, the truth. I studied his face carefully. For a moment, he looked older than usual, tired, thoughtful, almost regretful. Then he said something I'll never forget. "Sometimes people get used to seeing only one version of a story." Before I could ask what he meant, he changed the subject, completely, as if the conversation never happened. But his words stayed with me. Years later, I'd understand exactly what he meant. Because Dad wasn't just observing family dynamics anymore. He was documenting them, quietly, carefully. Inside a notebook nobody knew existed, a notebook that would eventually expose years of favoritism, hidden decisions, and one shocking secret involving Olivia, a secret Dad discovered during the final year of his life, a secret so serious that he created a plan to protect the truth after he was gone, and that plan began shortly after his cancer diagnosis, the diagnosis that changed everything. The cancer diagnosis arrived on a rainy Tuesday morning. At least that's when Dad told us. Mom called everyone into the living room. Her voice sounded strange, tighter than usual, like she was trying very hard not to cry. The moment I walked through the front door, I knew something was wrong. Nobody was talking. Nobody was smiling. Even Olivia looked nervous. And that almost never happened. Dad sat quietly in his favorite chair, the same chair he'd used for years, the same chair where he'd read newspapers, watched football games, and fallen asleep countless times. But that day, he looked different. Smaller somehow. Older. Tired. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm. Too calm. "I have cancer." The room froze. For a few seconds, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Nobody even breathed. Mom began crying immediately. Olivia rushed to Dad's side. Questions started flying. Doctors, treatment, hospitals, options, survival rates. I just sat there, staring, trying to process what I'd heard. Because until that moment, my father had always felt permanent, like the kind of person who would simply always exist. And suddenly that certainty was gone. The following months became a blur of appointments, tests, specialists, medications, hospital visits, family meetings, and endless waiting. The kind of waiting that slowly drains people. At first, everyone pulled together, or at least it seemed that way. Olivia began organizing appointments. Mom handled medical paperwork. I drove Dad whenever extra help was needed. For a while, we functioned like a team, a family, maybe for the first time in years. But slowly, things started changing. Subtle things, small things, things that didn't seem important at first. Conversations stopped when I entered rooms. Documents disappeared from tables. Family decisions happened without me. Plans were made without my knowledge. Information arrived late, sometimes not at all. At first, I blamed stress. Everyone was overwhelmed. Everyone was scared. Everyone was exhausted. That explanation made sense, until it didn't. One afternoon, I arrived early for a hospital visit. As I approached Dad's room, I heard voices inside. Mom's voice, Olivia's voice, and Dad's. They were discussing something serious. I wasn't trying to listen. But then I heard my name, and instinctively I stopped. Emma doesn't need to worry about that. That was Olivia. A few seconds passed. Then Mom replied, "Let's keep things simple." Simple. The word bothered me. Why would my involvement make things complicated? Before I could hear anything else, the door opened. Olivia stepped into the hallway. The moment she saw me, her expression changed. Instantly. "Oh," she forced a smile. "When did you get here?" "Just now." For a second, nobody spoke. Then she changed the subject. Quickly. Too quickly. Something felt wrong. I couldn't explain it, but I felt it. And over the next several months, that feeling only grew stronger. Dad's health continued declining. Some days were better than others. Some days he seemed almost normal. Other days he struggled to leave bed. Watching it happen was heartbreaking. Yet even as his condition worsened, Dad remained observant. Very observant. More observant than anyone realized. One evening during a hospital visit, I noticed him writing in a small black notebook. The same notebook he eventually gave me. At the time, I assumed it was personal, maybe thoughts, memories, reflections, something private. But the more I visited, the more I noticed him writing. Every day, sometimes for 20 minutes, sometimes for an hour, always focused, always careful. One afternoon, I finally asked, "Dad, what are you writing?" He smiled, then closed the notebook. "Just keeping records." Records? The answer felt strange, but I didn't press further. Looking back now, I wish I had, because those records would eventually become the most important evidence in our family's history. Months passed. Then something happened that changed the way I viewed everything. Dad was scheduled for an important treatment, one that required several signatures, legal paperwork, medical authorization, financial authorization, routine documents. At least that's what I thought. When I arrived at the hospital, Olivia already had everything organized. Folders, forms, documents, checklists. She moved confidently, like someone completely in charge. Dad looked exhausted. Too exhausted to review every page himself, so he trusted her, just like everyone else did. Then I noticed something strange. A document disappeared. One moment it sat on top of the stack. The next moment it was gone. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe I imagined it. But something about the interaction felt off. Later that evening, I mentioned it to Dad, casually, almost jokingly. To my surprise, his expression changed. Not dramatically, but enough. Enough for me to notice. "What document?" he asked. I described it. The blue folder, the attached paperwork, the missing pages. Dad didn't say anything immediately. Instead, he stared out the hospital window, thinking. Then he nodded slowly and reached for the notebook. Without saying another word, he wrote something down. At the time, I didn't understand why. Years later, I would. Because that wasn't the first concern he'd recorded, or the last. The notebook was becoming a timeline, a record, a collection of observations, and many of those observations centered around Olivia. Not because he disliked her, not because he distrusted her completely, but because he was starting to notice things, small inconsistencies, Small decisions, small behaviors that didn't quite make sense, things everyone else ignored, including me. One evening, about 6 months before he died, Dad asked me an unusual question. We were alone. The hospital was quiet. The sun was setting outside. Do you trust your sister? The question caught me completely off guard. What? Dad repeated it, calmly, slowly. Do you trust Olivia? I hesitated, not because I suspected anything, because I wasn't sure how to answer. She's my sister. Dad nodded, then asked again. That isn't what I asked. The room suddenly felt very quiet. I thought carefully, then answered honestly. I want to trust her. Dad looked at me for several seconds, then slowly nodded, as though my answer confirmed something he'd already been thinking. He never explained, never elaborated, never told me why he asked. Instead, he simply opened the notebook and wrote another entry, another observation, another concern, another piece of a puzzle I couldn't yet see. What I didn't know was that Dad had already started preparing for something he hoped would never be necessary, something involving a lawyer, a letter, and instructions that would only be revealed after his death. Because deep down, Dad feared that once he was gone, the truth might disappear with him. So he created a way to make sure it didn't. And the first step of that plan happened just 3 months before he died. The day he met privately with his attorney, a meeting nobody knew about, especially Olivia. 3 months before Dad died, he made a decision that would change everything after he was gone. What Emma saw Dad stopped sharing financial details with the family. Olivia became increasingly involved in paperwork and decisions. Conversations ended whenever Emma entered the room. Dad began writing constantly in the black notebook. The secret meeting. One Wednesday afternoon, Dad told everyone he was going to a medical appointment. Later, Emma learned that wasn't true. Instead, Dad met privately with Mr. Harrison, his attorney of nearly 30 years. The meeting lasted almost 2 hours. No one knew about it, no one except Dad and the lawyer. What Dad asked for, a separate trust, a sealed letter, instructions that would only be opened if his wishes were misrepresented, a private record of concerns he had been documenting in his notebook. Why he did it. Mr. Harrison later explained that Dad was worried about what would happen after his death. Not just financially, emotionally, relationally. He had started noticing patterns, information being filtered, decisions being made without full discussion, pressure around the business and estate, assumptions that one child was entitled to more than the other. Dad never accused anyone directly, but he no longer trusted silence to protect the truth. Olivia takes control. As Dad's health declined, Olivia became the family's organizer. She managed appointments, coordinated paperwork, and handled conversations with doctors and accountants. Everyone praised her for it. Emma did too. At first. But slowly, Olivia's role changed from helpful daughter to gatekeeper. Messages passed through her, documents passed through her, questions passed through her. And somehow, Emma increasingly found herself on the outside. When she asked for updates, the answers were vague. When she offered help, she was told everything was handled. When she wanted to review paperwork, the conversation moved on. The exclusion was subtle, so subtle that it was difficult to challenge, but impossible to ignore. The notebook returns. About 2 months before Dad died, he asked Emma to stay after visiting hours. The hospital room was quiet. Machines hummed softly. Dad looked exhausted, but his eyes were clear. He reached into the drawer beside his bed and pulled out the black notebook. Keep this safe. Emma frowned. What is it? Dad hesitated, then gave the same answer that would haunt her later. Something your sister doesn't know about. Before Emma could ask another question, a nurse entered the room. The moment ended. Dad closed his eyes, exhausted, and Emma left with the notebook tucked inside her bag. She still didn't understand what it contained. Not yet. What Emma didn't realize. Inside that notebook were months of observations, dates, conversations, financial concerns, questions about missing records, notes about family dynamics, and one line that would later become devastatingly important. Notebook entry. If I am no longer here, Emma deserves the truth. Dad had been preparing for a possibility nobody else considered, the possibility that his intentions would be misunderstood or deliberately rewritten after his death. The last conversation. A week before he died, Dad seemed unusually alert. Emma visited alone that evening. For nearly 20 minutes, they talked about ordinary things: her job, books, old family vacations. Then Dad became quiet. Emma? Yeah? Don't let anyone tell you who you are after I'm gone. The sentence felt strange, almost unrelated to the conversation. Emma laughed softly. Why would they? Dad looked toward the window, then answered in a voice barely above a whisper. Because people protect the story that benefits them. At the time, she thought he was speaking philosophically. Now she knows he was warning her. The day my father died felt unreal. One moment I was driving to the hospital, the next I was standing beside his bed, listening to a doctor explain something I could barely hear. Words drifted in and out. Peaceful. Comfortable. No suffering. Final moments. I remember nodding. I remember people crying. I remember Olivia holding Mom's hand. But most of all, I remember staring at the empty chair beside Dad's bed. Because for the first time in my life, I couldn't imagine calling him again and hearing that familiar voice answer. The funeral took place 5 days later. More than 300 people attended: business partners, neighbors, friends, former employees, relatives, people whose lives Dad had impacted over 40 years. The line stretched outside the church, and for hours people shared stories about him. Stories I had never heard before. Stories about generosity, kindness, integrity, leadership, patience. The strange thing was how often people used the same phrase. Your father always believed in fairness. I heard it again and again. Fairness, fairness, fairness. The word followed me all day, and each time I heard it, something felt strange. Because fairness wasn't the word I associated with our family. Not anymore. After the funeral, life became strangely quiet. The visitors disappeared, the phone calls slowed, the sympathy cards stopped arriving, and reality settled in. Dad was gone. A week later, Olivia called a family meeting. The tone of her voice immediately caught my attention. Confident, controlled, certain. We need to discuss Dad's estate. I assumed the lawyer would be involved. Instead, Olivia explained that she had already reviewed most of the paperwork. Already reviewed? That seemed fast. Very fast. Still, nobody questioned it. Because nobody questioned Olivia. Not Mom, not our relatives, not even me. At least not yet. The meeting took place at my parents' house, the same dining room where we'd spent holidays together for years. Except this time, the atmosphere felt completely different. Cold, formal, uncomfortable. Mom sat beside Olivia. Several relatives attended. And from the moment the conversation started, something felt wrong. Olivia controlled every detail, every explanation, every document, every answer. When someone asked about Dad's business holdings, Olivia answered. When someone asked about investment accounts, Olivia answered. When someone asked about legal matters, Olivia answered. The entire meeting felt less like a discussion and more like a presentation she had prepared in advance. Then came the moment that changed everything. One cousin asked a simple question. What did Robert leave to Emma? The room became quiet. Olivia looked toward me, then smiled politely. A smile I'll never forget. Emma received some personal items. Personal items? I frowned. What does that mean? Olivia flipped through several papers, then answered casually. Mostly keepsakes. The room felt suddenly very warm. What about the estate? I asked. Olivia looked uncomfortable, only for a second. Then her confidence returned. Dad structured things differently. Differently. I hated vague answers, and that answer was incredibly vague. Then she delivered the sentence that humiliated me in front of everyone. Most of Dad's assets were left to the people most involved in preserving his legacy. Silence. Nobody said anything. But everyone understood the implication. Olivia had been involved. I hadn't. Or at least that's what she wanted everyone to believe. One aunt looked at me sympathetically. Another avoided eye contact completely. The shame hit immediately. Hard. Not because of money, because of what the statement suggested, that Dad trusted Olivia more, valued Olivia more, believed in Olivia more, the exact fear I'd carried for 18 years, and now it was being presented as fact. That evening, I drove home fighting tears. Again, just like I had after countless family gatherings growing up. For a moment, I almost believed her. Almost. Then I remembered the notebook. Dad's notebook. The black notebook sitting untouched inside my apartment drawer. The notebook he specifically told me to protect. Something about that memory stopped me. If Dad truly intended to leave me behind, why give me the notebook? Why ask me to keep it safe? Why warn me not to let others define who I was? None of it made sense. For the first time, I opened the notebook. Fully, carefully, page by page. What I found shocked me. Dad hadn't been writing random thoughts. He'd been documenting events, dates, meetings, conversations, observations. Entire pages filled with detailed notes. At first, the entries seemed ordinary. Notes about treatment appointments, business updates, family observations. Then I reached an entry dated 8 months before his death, and suddenly everything changed. Olivia insists Emma doesn't need to attend estate discussions. I stared at the page. What? I continued reading. I asked why. Her answer was vague. Another entry. Information appears to be reaching Emma later than everyone else. Another. Need to review documents personally moving forward. The further I read, the more concerned I became. Because Dad wasn't just recording events, he was recording concerns. Real concerns. And many of those concerns involved Olivia. Not accusations, not conclusions. Concerns. Questions. Patterns. Then I found an entry that made my heart stop. If Olivia continues speaking for me, people may eventually confuse her wishes with mine. I read the sentence 3 times, then a 4th. Because suddenly the estate meeting felt very different. Suddenly Olivia's explanations felt different. Suddenly everything felt different. For the first time, I wondered a terrifying question. What if the story Olivia told wasn't the whole story? The next page contained a name, a single name, underlined twice, Mr. Harrison, Dad's attorney, and beside it, a short, handwritten note. Letter secured. Instructions confirmed. My pulse quickened. Letter? What letter? I flipped through the remaining pages, searching desperately for answers, but there were none. Only references, mentions, hints. Enough to know something existed, not enough to know what. That night I barely slept, because for the first time since Dad's death, I felt something unexpected. Hope. Tiny. Fragile. Dangerous. But hope nonetheless. The next morning I called Mr. Harrison, and that phone call would begin the chain of events that eventually led to a crowded conference room, a final letter, and the moment my sister's smile disappeared forever. I stared at the phone for nearly 10 minutes before making the call. My hand wouldn't stop shaking, not because I was nervous about speaking to Mr. Harrison, because I was terrified of what he might say, terrified he would confirm Olivia's story, terrified the notebook meant nothing, terrified I had spent years hoping for an explanation that didn't exist. Finally, I dialed the number. The receptionist transferred me immediately. A moment later, a calm voice answered. Mr. Harrison speaking. Hello, this is Emma Carter. A brief pause. Then something unexpected happened. Emma. His voice softened, almost relieved. I've been wondering when you'd call. I froze. What do you mean? Silence. Then, I think we should meet. The meeting was scheduled for the following afternoon. I barely slept that night. Questions raced through my mind. What was the letter? Why had Dad mentioned it? Why had Mr. Harrison expected my call? And most importantly, why did I feel like everyone knew something except me? The next day, I arrived at the attorney's office 15 minutes early. The waiting room was quiet, professional, ordinary. yet my stomach felt like it was tied in knots. Eventually, Mr. Harrison appeared. He looked exactly the same as he had for years. Gray hair, calm expression, measured voice, the kind of man who never seemed surprised by anything. He led me into his office, closed the door, and before I could speak, he asked a question. "Did Robert give you the notebook?" My heart skipped. "Yes." Mr. Harrison nodded, as though confirming something. Then he opened a drawer, removed a thick sealed envelope, and placed it carefully on his desk. My breath caught immediately. The envelope. Dad's letter. The one mentioned in the notebook. The one hidden from everyone. The one Olivia clearly didn't know existed. Mr. Harrison folded his hands. "Your father instructed me to keep this sealed unless certain circumstances occurred." "What circumstances?" He looked directly at me. "If anyone misrepresented his wishes." The room suddenly felt very quiet, because deep down, I already knew. The letter wasn't just important, it was protection. Protection Dad created before he died. Mr. Harrison continued. "Based on the notebook and recent conversations, I believe Robert's instructions require this letter to be opened." I swallowed hard. Then he broke the seal. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The pages inside looked ordinary, simple, handwritten. But the moment Mr. Harrison started reading, everything changed. "To my family," the words felt like hearing Dad's voice again. "If this letter is being read, then events unfolded exactly as I feared they might." I felt chills. I spent years watching people speak for me instead of listening to me. Mr. Harrison paused, then continued. "Most importantly, I worried that one daughter's voice would eventually become mistaken for my own." My heart pounded. Because suddenly every conversation, every meeting, every explanation from Olivia made sense. Dad had seen it too. The attorney kept reading. "Emma was never my failure." Tears instantly filled my eyes. Not because of inheritance, not because of money, because those 5 words healed something 18 years old. A wound I carried most of my life. The family failure, the disappointment, the forgotten daughter. Dad rejected every label in one sentence. Mr. Harrison continued. "If Emma ever believes I valued her less than Olivia, then I have failed as her father." I couldn't stop crying. For years I believed exactly that. And now I was discovering I had been wrong. Very wrong. The letter continued. "Emma earned every achievement without expecting applause. She showed resilience when life was difficult. She built her future without depending on anyone. And although I rarely said it aloud, I admired that deeply." The tears became impossible to stop, because those were words I'd waited my entire life to hear. Not from a lawyer, from Dad, even if it came years too late. Then came the section nobody expected. The section addressed directly to Olivia. "Olivia," Mr. Harrison's voice remained steady. "Leadership is not ownership. Responsibility is not entitlement. And speaking the loudest does not make someone right." The room felt frozen, because every sentence sounded like a warning Dad had written long before he died. Then came the final instruction, the instruction that changed everything. "Both daughters shall receive equal inheritance from all remaining assets held within my estate and trust structures." Equal. One word, one simple word. And yet it destroyed 6 years of assumptions, 6 years of stories, 6 years of manipulation, 6 years of believing Olivia had somehow been chosen. She hadn't. Dad chose fairness, exactly as everyone always said. The following week, Mr. Harrison arranged a formal family meeting. Everyone attended. Mom, Olivia, relatives, cousins, aunts, uncles. And for the first time, nobody controlled the conversation except the truth. Mr. Harrison read the entire letter aloud. Every page, every word, every instruction. The room became quieter with each paragraph. Relatives exchanged stunned looks. Mom cried. Several cousins stared at Olivia. And Olivia? She stopped smiling. Because for the first time, she couldn't explain things away. She couldn't interrupt, couldn't redirect, couldn't control the narrative. Dad had already spoken, and his words carried more weight than anyone else's. When the reading ended, nobody spoke for nearly a minute. Then Mom quietly asked, "He really wrote all of that?" Mr. Harrison nodded. Every word. Mom began crying again. Not dramatic crying, not loud crying. The kind that comes from regret, the kind that comes from realizing something important too late. Then she looked at me, and for the first time in years, really looked at me. Not as Olivia's sister, not as the family failure, not as the daughter who never measured up. Just Emma. "I'm sorry." Two simple words. Words I'd wanted for years. Words I eventually stopped expecting. And somehow hearing them now felt different. Because I didn't need them anymore. Dad's letter had already given me what I needed. The truth. The truth that I wasn't a failure. The truth that Dad saw me. The truth that Dad believed in me. The truth that he always had. As for Olivia, she never argued. Never challenged the letter. Never denied it. Maybe because she couldn't. Or maybe because deep down she knew Dad was right. Over time, our relationship improved. Slowly. Carefully. Not perfectly. But honestly. The labels disappeared. The comparisons faded. The old stories lost their power. And for the first time in my life, I stopped trying to prove my worth. Because worth isn't something your family gives you. It's something you recognize in yourself. A year later, I framed one page from Dad's letter. Not the inheritance section. Not the legal instructions. Not the financial details. Just one sentence. Emma was never my failure. It hangs in my office today. A reminder. A lesson. A gift. Because sometimes the greatest inheritance a parent leaves behind isn't money. It isn't property. It isn't assets. It's the truth. And sometimes the truth arrives exactly when you need it most.